Good evening. Welcome to South Asia Newsline. I'm Shivangi Mishra. Here are the top stories we are tracking for you on Wednesday, the 22nd of February. India says era is not for war as G20 finance meet starts in Bengaluru city. 9/11 victims cannot seize Afghan central bank assets, says US judge. And power price hikes pushed Sri Lankan bakery owners to the edge. And now for all the details. India on Wednesday said it was time for dialogue and diplomacy, reiterating its stance on the war in Ukraine as finance officials from the G20 countries met near the southern city of Bengaluru.
India's Information Minister Anurag Thakur on Wednesday reiterated the country's stance on the war in Ukraine, that today's era is not for war, but for dialogue and diplomacy, days ahead of the February 24 anniversary of Russia's invasion, and as G20 finance officials started a meeting near Bengaluru city. Anurag Thakur made the remarks after welcoming delegates to the February 22 to 25 meeting, which is the first major event of India's G20 presidency. India's presidency of the bloc comes at a time when neighbouring Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Pakistan have sought bailouts from the IMF due to an economic slowdown caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and the Ukraine war.
Today's era is not of war. Democracy, diplomacy and dialogue is the way forward.
India has kept a neutral stance on the war, declining to blame Russia for the invasion, seeking a diplomatic solution and increasing its purchases of Russian oil over the past year.
Moving on. Israeli ambassador to India Naor Gilon said on Wednesday that Israel is happy with India's Adani group undertaking the construction of Haifa Port in his country. Gilon said it is a very symbolic sign of strategic trust in depositing your strategic assets in hands of Indian companies on the heels of completion of 30 years of diplomatic ties. The Adani Group and its partner logistics group Gadot purchased the port for $1.15 billion. The entrance of Adani has spurred Israel's leaders to revive hopes of creating a trade gateway connecting the Mediterranean port of Haifa and the broader Middle East, which do not have ties with Israel.
We are giving it to an Indian company. I think from our point of view, it's a very symbolic sign of deep trust in depositing your strategic assets in hands of Indian companies. I think that it has the potential, especially at Adani Group, who are the bread and butter, the basic work was ports where they started. So they have the potential there for them to make the Haifa Port the port it needs to be, and to utilize it to bring to increase trade in the region, trade between India and Israel. I think the potential there is huge, also to help the trade between our countries and everything. And we are very happy.
People in Pakistan's Lahore city recently expressed their anger over skyrocketing prices of vegetables, especially tomatoes and onions, which has annoyed them at large. They said that 170 billion rupees in new taxes will further burden the poor while the rich continue to evade taxes. Locals in Lahore city of Pakistan recently expressed their concern over skyrocketing prices of vegetables, especially onions and tomato, which has annoyed them at large. They expressed a poor man who earns 500 rupees cannot afford vegetables even for a day, and even lentils are out of their reach now. A resident said 170 billion rupees in new taxes will further weaken the poor, while the rich continue to benefit from tax subsidies.
गरीब आदमी आपको पता है जो 500-700 रुपया कमाने वाला है उसके लिए एक दिन की सब्जी बनाना भी बड़ा मुश्किल हो गया जी गुजारा. लेकिन ये 800-1000 रुपया दिहाड़ी है, 600-700 रुपये लीटर ऑयल है आपका, तो सब्जी आप लगा लें. एक दिन की जो सब्जी है ना वो मेरा ख्याल 500-600 रुपये में.
Meanwhile, Finance Minister Ishaq Dar said on Wednesday that Pakistan will this week receive a new $700 million loan from China to help shore up its foreign exchange reserves. The credit facility, extended to the state-owned China Development Bank, comes as Pakistan is thrashing out a deal with the IMF to unlock funds from a $6.5 billion bailout crucial to staving off economic collapse. A key border crossing between Pakistan and Afghanistan remained closed for a fourth day on Wednesday, with thousands of trucks stuck at the crossing. According to Pakistan-Afghanistan Joint Chamber of Commerce and Industry, around 6,000 trucks loaded with goods had been stuck on both sides since Sunday. They have raised concern as the closure of the border crossing was causing losses to traders in both the countries. The Taliban administration had closed Torkham, the main point of transit between Pakistan and landlocked Afghanistan, citing Pakistan's failure in its commitments to allow transit and travelers and sick people seeking treatment to cross. Residents had also reported heavy gunfire on Monday morning near the Torkham border crossing. However, Taliban officials have denied any clashes and said the situation was under control.
شنه بینډۍ ده شین مرچکې دی ټینډه ده بادرنګ دی ټماټر دی دا اوبه دي بس ترې روانې دي دا نقصانونه دي چې وشو دا څومره ربونو روپو مالونه دي مال والا تاوان دی اوس یې که په موږ واپس کیم کرایه نشته یو شی هم نشته دا نقصان دا تیل او دا خرچې دلته دا په لاره څومره خرچې وشو دا موږ بیا څوک راکوي څوک هم نه راکوي.
A US judge in Manhattan, George Daniels, on Tuesday decided that victims of the 9/11 attacks are not entitled to seize $3.5 billion of assets belonging to Afghanistan's central bank to satisfy court judgments they obtained against the Taliban. Daniels said he was constitutionally restrained and letting 9/11 victims seize Afghan central bank assets would amount to a ruling that the Taliban are Afghanistan's legitimate government. He further added that the Taliban, not the Afghan people, must pay for the Taliban's liability in the 9/11 attacks. The US Treasury Department last year said about $3.5 billion in Afghan central bank assets will be transferred to a new Swiss-based trust fund that will be shielded from the Taliban. It said that the funds will be used to help stabilize Afghanistan's collapsed economy. The new electricity tariffs announced last week have made life difficult in Sri Lanka, which is already struggling with the worst economic crisis in decades. Business owners in the island nation say they are running business on legacy and tradition instead of profits. A report.
The new 66% electricity tariff hike announced last week has made running businesses in crisis in Sri Lanka difficult. Owners of Wish Bakers, which has been feeding Colombo residents with bread, buns and other baked goods for last 25 years, say legacy and tradition are keeping the business running rather than profit nowadays. The bakery, which has 15 outlets and 60 employees, had already doubled the prices of their products at the height of the country's economic crisis in the middle of last year. Sri Lanka's 5,000-odd bakeries, which employ about 200,000 people, have been badly hit. Many find it difficult to repay loans after the central bank was forced to increase interest rates to record highs last year.
අවුරුදු 5කට පස්සේ ගිහලා බැලුවොත් එහෙම දැන්ට අපේ සේල් එක සාමාන්‍යයෙන් 150කින් විතර අඩු වෙලා තියෙනවා. සේවක ප්‍රමාණයත් වැඩ කරන ප්‍රමාණය 150කින් විතර අඩු වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඒකට එක හේතුවක් තමයි දැන් තියෙන බඩු මිලත් එක්ක කරන්ට් බිලත් එක්ක වියදම් ඔක්කොම වැඩි වෙලා තියෙනවා. අපිට නිෂ්පාදනය අපිට කරන්න පුළුවන් වුණත් ගන්න අපිට පාරිභෝගිකව අඩු වෙලා තියෙනවා. එකක් ඒ මිනිසුන් අතේ සල්ලි නැහැ අපිට බලෙන් විකුණන්නත් බෑ.
දැන්ටත් බඩු මිල ඉතාම අධික ලෙස ඉහළ ගිහිල්ලා තියෙන්නේ. ඉතින් රටේ ජනතාවට දැන් මේ මොහොතේ ජීවත් වෙන්න බෑ ඇත්තටම. මේ රටේ මිනිස්සු තුන් වේල කන්නේ බොහොම අමාරුයි. ඉතින් තවත් ඉදිරියේදී බඩු මිල වැඩි වෙනවා කියන්නේ මේ රටේ මිනිස්සු ඇත්තටම ජීවත් වෙන්නම බැරි තත්ත්වයක් උදා වෙනවා.
The government had already increased electricity prices by 75% last year. It hopes the fresh move will persuade the International Monetary Fund to provide a bailout. But in the meantime, it adds to the pain of Sri Lankans already grappling with inflation above 54% year on year in January and income taxes as high as 36%.
A startup company in India's Indore city is turning heads with its quirky pop-up, which asks employees to go home, warning them of a system shutdown once their office hours are up. Take a look.
An Indian startup in central Indore city is battling the culture of overwork and long hours by locking its computers and sending employees home with a pop-up message, "Please go home." The message tells workers of soft-grid computers, warning them the system will shut down once their office hours are up. A company official said the employees were shocked at first as most of them were used to working at companies where they needed permission to clock off.
लॉन्ग स्ट्रेचिंग आवर्स ऑफिस के जो है वो हम रिड्यूस करने की कोशिश करते हैं हमेशा। तो उसके लिए हमने एक सॉफ्टवेयर बिल्ड किया जो कि एक नोटिफिकेशन सिस्टम है। जैसे ही सिस्टम टर्न ऑन होता है वहाँ से हमारा टाइम ट्रैकिंग स्टार्ट होता है एंड टाइम जैसे ही शिफ्ट टाइम ओवर हो जाता है देन एक पॉपअप आ जाता है विच रिमाइंड्स देम कि आपका शिफ्ट टाइम ओवर हो गया एंड यू कैन नाउ गो होम। सो इस तरह का हमने एक टूल बिल्ड किया है। सो एंड जो बेसिक मोटो है दैट इज़ वर्क लाइफ बैलेंस, कि वो अपने फैमिली को टाइम दे सकें, सोशली थोड़ा टाइम स्पेंड कर सकें।
The employees, who number about 40, say they are sleeping better and are more motivated.
Being a girl मेरे लिए बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है कि मैं टाइमली घर पहुंचूं। घर के और भी बहुत सारे काम होते हैं तो उन सब को पूरा करने के लिए और वर्क लाइफ बैलेंस के लिए मेरे लिए पापा बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट हो जाता है।
Working long hours kills hundreds of thousands of people a year, the World Health Organization said in 2021, a trend that worsened during the health crisis of COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, that's all we have for you from South Asia this evening. Now our viewers can watch the show on southasianewsline.com. You can also visit us on facebook.com/SAsiaNewsline and follow us on Twitter @SAsiaNewsline. That's all in tonight's edition. We will see you same time tomorrow. Good night.